Hi Bernardo.
Hi, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm fine. I'm fine. And you?
I'm busy, but doing okay too.
Okay. Thank you for accepting my invitation to participate in this interview. For me, it's really an honor to have you here today. You are a philosopher and a scientist. Indeed, you have a PhD in philosophy and another one in computer engineering. And you have published many academic papers and books about the mental nature of reality. Among these books are noteworthy Why Materialism is Baloney and The Idea of the World. I read those books and it was a very challenging work, but very interesting one. And before we begin, I would like to say that some of the questions I will be asking may seem basic or naive, and I apologize in advance if there's inaccuracies or misunderstandings in the formulations of the questions.
That's what I'm here for, to help clarify what we mean by all this.
First, for my first question, can you tell us about your academic background and share how your interest in the subjects of consciousness and the nature of reality developed?
So my initial academic background was in computer engineering and high energy physics. I used to work at CERN back in the 90s, 96, 97, um, helping develop the data acquisition system for one of the experiments of the Large Hadron Collider, namely the Atlas experiment. And it was a huge challenge as far as computer engineering and computer science was concerned, because we could not store all the data that was produced by the experiment. So we had to use some form of artificial intelligence to analyze the data on the fly and decide whether it was potential new physics that we needed to analyze, needed to store, or old physics, which we then would discard. And so I spent time developing all that. And at some point, after I had already left CERN, I was already working for Philips Research here in the Netherlands. I started wondering, I can build a computer that is as intelligent as a physicist in analyzing data coming from an experiment. Could I make that computer conscious as well?
Mm.
Not only intelligent, but also conscious. Could the computer experience its calculations in the same way that I experience the calculations of my brain? And after a couple of years thinking about this, I realized that I was asking all the wrong questions. I was presupposing that consciousness is something that you create as opposed to something fundamental in nature. And I was confusing consciousness with intelligence. They are two completely separate, completely different things. One is objectively measurable, such as intelligence, and consciousness can only be experienced from a first person perspective. It cannot be measured from the outside. And that led me to return to my thoughts about philosophy, which I used to have when I was younger. And then I developed a whole other academic background in philosophy. I got myself a second PhD in philosophy of mind specifically. And in that process, I wrote a bunch of books.
Mm.
And today I am known a little bit as a philosopher and also still known a little bit as a computer engineer, because I have designed some computers that are still very popular today, that still sell to hobbyists and universities. So yeah, I have this double background.
So you developed a work on analytic idealism. Uh, can you explain in a brief summary what is this idealism?
Yeah. It's the notion that everything in nature is mental or experiential. That is not to say that the world is in your mind or my mind alone. Analytic idealism accepts, even postulates, that there is a real external world out there beyond our individual minds.
Mhm.
But that world, too, is mental, just like our own thoughts and emotions are mental. But the states of the world are not in our individual minds. They are out there. They are mental, but they are out there, and we cannot change them merely by wishing or fantasizing about their being different. That's analogous to how my thoughts are mental, but they are external to your mind. My thoughts are not in your mind. My thoughts would still exist even if you didn't exist. And you cannot change my thoughts merely by wishing them to be different. In exactly the same way, the thoughts of nature are really out there. We cannot change them by merely wishing them to be different. Um, and those thoughts of nature, between quotes, um, they present themselves to us upon observation as what we call matter or physical stuff. So physical stuff is what appears on the screen of perception, the things that we can see, hear, touch, taste, smell. Um, but the idea is that these things that we hear, touch, taste, and smell, this physical stuff that we experience, is a representation of the world, not the world as it is in itself. The world as it is in itself is made of mental or experiential states. And when we observe that world, we represent the states of the world to ourselves in the form of the things we see, hear, touch, and smell. So perception or physicality is a sort of dashboard representation of the measurements we make on the real world. But the real world is not physical, it is mental.
How can we reconcile this experience of being an individual mind or ego, which is mental, with consciousness or the mental nature of reality?
The question is a natural one. If the whole of nature is mental and we are mental beings, then why do I not know what's happening in the galaxy of Andromeda right now? Or why can I not read your thoughts? If everything is one big mind, why can't I read your thoughts? And presumably you cannot read mine. Why do we seem to be separate from the rest of nature if it's mind everywhere? Well, the answer is an empirical answer. There is a mechanism in mind that is known to psychiatry, has been known for a couple of 100 years. And for the last 20 years or so, it's known objectively because that state can be diagnosed with neuroimaging tools like functional MRI, even EEG and MEG. And that process is called dissociation. And what it does is precisely to compartmentalize different segments of mind and lead to the illusion that there are separate centers of awareness within one and the same mind. Research has shown, for instance, in 2015 in Germany, a woman who was diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, an extreme form of dissociation, She had outer personalities, these seemingly separate personalities in her own mind. And some of these outers claimed to be blind. So what neuroscientists did, they put this woman, they instrumented the woman with an EEG cap to measure her brain activity. And when the blind alter was in control of the body, she had no brain activity in the visual cortex, the area responsible for vision, even though her eyes were open and she was not blind. And this shows you that dissociation can literally make you blind to what is right in front of your open eyes, even when you are not, you don't have any physical issue with your eyes. So nature shows us that there is a process in nature that seemingly splits one mind into multiple centers of awareness that are blind to what's happening in one another's space. And the postulate is that this is what we are. We are dissociative outers in the mind of nature. Now, research shows, and this is research from 2014 done here in the Netherlands by Jolanda Schlumpf and her team. Research shows that if you put a patient with dissociative identity disorder in a large brain scanner, an fMRI, and you take a picture of the patient's brain activity, you can identify dissociative processes based on that image. In other words, there is something dissociative processes look like. They have an extrinsic appearance. They look like something identifiable. So if we are dissociative processes in the mind of nature, we should look like something from an external perspective. And lo and behold, we do. We look like biology, life, metabolism. So according to analytic idealism, life is what dissociation in the mind of nature looks like. It is, life, biology is the extrinsic appearance of dissociation. And from the inside perspective, we are dissociated because we can't read each other's thoughts, or we don't know what's happening beyond the horizon. From the outside perspective, we are dissociated because we have this clearly identifiable appearance that we call a body, a living body, that betrays the presence of a particular process, in this case, a dissociative process.
You used an analogy for explaining this relationship between individual mind and the larger framework of consciousness. That is the analogy of a whirlpool. Can you describe a little bit this analogy?
Yeah. So dissociation leads to an illusion of separation, not true separation. And we know that because a patient suffering from dissociation can be cured. That patient can reintegrate all the alters. And when that happens, the patient remembers the memories of each and every alter, which shows that there was always only one mind at play. And those alters were not truly separate. They were not entities in their own merit. They were just dissociative segments of one and the same mind. So there is never true separation. So if there is only one mind in nature, one field of subjectivity, of which we are alters, then we are also not separate from the rest of nature, which then raises the question, if we are not separate, how come we are so identifiable as individual organisms? Now, the way to understand this is to think of, say, a river. The water flow in the river can form little eddies or whirlpools. And you can clearly identify a whirlpool in a river. You can say, there is the whirlpool. You can even delineate the boundaries of the whirlpool. You can characterize the whirlpool through measurable quantities. You can say the whirlpool has this diameter, it's moving with this speed in that direction, and so on and so forth. The whirlpool is clearly identifiable as an entity, but you cannot take the whirlpool out of the river, which shows that there is nothing to the whirlpool but the river itself. The whirlpool is not a thing. The whirlpool is something the river is doing, but it's not a separate entity from the river, because you cannot take the whirlpool out of the river. There is only ever the river. All there is to the whirlpool is the river. In exactly the same way, we are identifiable. I can point at you and say, there you are. I can delineate the boundaries of your profile on my screen. I can say that you have a certain height, a certain weight, just like I can do with the whirlpool. Yet, there is nothing to you or me but the mind of nature, just like there is nothing to the whirlpool but the river. That's the idea.
This analogy of the whirlpool makes me think about the dissolution of the whirlpool. And how do you envision the nature of existence after death? There's no the whirlpool or the individual mind just disappears, but how can you explain that?
Yeah. So, in my view, the living body is the whirlpool. It is the extrinsic or the external appearance of the dissociation. In other words, the body is what the dissociation looks like from the outside. Therefore, the end of the living body is the end of the dissociation. If the dissociation is analogous to the water circling around, then the dissociation looks like a whirlpool, and the end of the whirlpool is the end of the dissociation. Now, this is very different from mainstream physicalism or materialism. Under materialism, the end of the body is the end of your mind, because your mind is supposed to be generated, produced by the body. Under analytic idealism, the body is merely what a dissociative process in mind looks like. So the end of the living body is the end of that dissociative process, not the end of the mind. The mind is the river, it's the mind of nature. So death is the end of your dissociation. Upon death, you are no longer going to perceive the world, but you will be the world. Because perception requires a boundary between you and the world. That's what we call perception. And that boundary is created by the dissociation. That's the boundary of the whirlpool. If there is no whirlpool, there is no boundary. And if there is no boundary, there is no perception. There is only being. So you return to what you used to be. You used to be the universe. And then you became dissociated, and now you think you are this little person walking around. Death is the end of the dissociation, and then you return to being what you have always, ever, and only been, which is nature or the river.
Okay. And how can we be certain that the existence of other minds is not an illusion, as solipsism suggests it?
We cannot be certain of anything. The game is not certainty. Certainty is naive. It doesn't exist. Not even in science. In science, there are no proofs. There are only counter-proofs. You can disprove something. You can never prove it. Otherwise, we would still believe in Newtonian mechanics. Now, Einstein's relativity disproved Newtonian mechanics. Today's latest theories in physics, namely loop quantum gravity, are shedding a completely new light on Einstein's relativity. We are about to disprove that too. Relativity works just as Newtonian mechanics works, but they are not ultimately true. So we cannot be certain of anything. What we can do is to live according to the most plausible hypothesis and avoid errors. I would maintain that it is not plausible that other people that are entirely analogous to me have bodies just like mine and behave in the same ways that I do not have consciousness. I do not think that is plausible. I know I have consciousness. I see people that look and behave just like me. It's more plausible that they too have consciousness just like I have. Can I prove that they are conscious? No, I cannot prove. They cannot prove that I am conscious. Nobody, only mathematicians can prove things. And they can do that because they constrain the boundaries of their system. It's called a formal system. They can prove things within that artificial system, but they cannot prove things about nature at large either. So it's not about proving, it's about living the most informed life by granting belief to the most plausible hypothesis. That's what we are trying to do.
How does your work relate to the teachings of the non-dual traditions, such as Advaita Vedanta, which questions the apparent duality of existence and points towards the realization of non-duality?
Under analytic idealism, there is no fundamental duality. In other words, there is no irreducible duality. There are only appearances of duality, such as past and future, subject and object, positive charge and negative charge, good and evil, left and right. We can talk of these dualities. It's a handy language term, but under analytic idealism, ultimately, there is only one field of subjectivity, only one mind in nature. There aren't two ultimate things. There is only one ultimate thing, and it is subjectivity itself. And all the appearances of duality, they arise because of the excitations of this one mind. Think of it as the excitations of one guitar string. Depending on how you pluck that guitar string, it produces different notes. That's how guitar players play. But each one of those notes is just a behavior of the string. There can be, say, 12 different notes produced by the string, but there is only one string. And there's nothing to each of the notes but that one string in movement. So you can have many different notes, although there is only one thing going on, the one guitar string. Now, in exactly the same way, under analytic idealism, there is only one mind in nature, but that mind can pluck itself like one can pluck a guitar string. That one mind can vibrate according to different patterns of vibration. So you get this multitude of complexity that we see in nature. All this stuff happening are oscillations or excitations of this one underlying field of subjectivity, just like the many notes of a guitar are produced by different patterns of excitation of the underlying guitar string. There is ever only the guitar string, despite the many notes. In the same way, there is ever only one mind in nature, despite the complexity and variety of nature.
I don't know if you are familiar with the practices of dream yoga or lucid dreaming. Uh, it's practices where one wakes up in the dream and realizes that everything in the dream is made of the same stuff. It's mental stuff. And can it be a good analogy for understanding your perspective? That is to
So
say, we are even if we appear as a character in the dream, in reality, it's not as it seems.
it's more than an analogy. It's a lower level instance of what I'm talking about. Um, I do not practice yoga or techniques of lucid dreaming, but I have had many spontaneous lucid dreams.
Mm.
I just woke up within my dream many times. I didn't try to induce that. I did nothing to make it happen. It just happened and still happens. And several times, once I realized, okay, now I am awake within my dream, this is an opportunity to do some science experiments
Mm.
now. And I asked myself the following question: based on what I am seeing and feeling around me in the dream right now, can I identify any difference between this and the real
Mm.
waking world? In other words, are the images in the dream more diffuse? Do they have less resolution? Do they have less depth? Less sharpness? Is there any characteristic that I could point to and say, oh, this tells me that it's a dream and it's not real because it's not as colorful or the resolution is not as good. That's what I was looking for. I knew it was a dream because of memory. I remembered who I was and where I lived. And I remembered having gone to bed and not having yet woken up. So I knew it was a dream. But I couldn't tell that it wasn't a dream based on the quality of what I was perceiving. In other words, during my lucid dreams, my mind is perfectly capable of generating a world indistinguishable from the real world.
Mm.
So to me, that was extremely compelling evidence that mind can do just that. It can create an entire universe, which is what analytic idealism postulates. It postulates that the mind of nature, not my mind, not your mind alone, but
Mhm.
the mind of the whole of nature, is generating our waking universe. And that mind can do that, to me, is clear because I have experienced it in lucid dreams many times. Now, the question that it raises is the following. If this whole thing, the universe, reality, is a kind of dream in the mind of nature, and we are dissociated alters partaking in the same dream, do we see that happen in the minds of people with dissociative identity disorder?
Mm.
Can their alters partake in the same dreams and see one another in the dream, just like you and I can see one another
Mm.
here? If the answer is yes, then it's very suggestive that that's what reality is. And
Mm.
research on this was done. It was done by Harvard University some 20 years ago. They studied people suffering from acute dissociative identity disorder. They studied their dream lives. And lo and behold, approximately 1/4 of patients of dissociative identity disorder do have dreams in which multiple dissociated alters partake at the same time. They partake of the same dream at the same time as different characters in the dream. And they see one another within the dream. And there is one patient who had 6 different alters partaking in the same dream. Now, how do we know that? We know that because when the patient wakes up, each alter reports on what he or she dreamed last night. And the therapist realizes that all the alters are actually talking about the same dream. But each alter experienced the same dream from its own perspective and could see the other alters and interact with the other alters. And there is this one patient with 6 alters in the same dream in which one alter clubbed another alter over the head, hit another alter over the head with a bat. So not only can multiple alters partake in the same dream, not only can alters see one another within the dream, they can even hit one another over the head in the dream. They can see each other, shake hands, interact within the dream space of the host personality. So if we are dissociated alters in the mind of nature, then that's probably what's going on, just one hierarchical level higher or lower, depending on how you look upon this. And that's extremely suggestive. Yeah.
It's very, very interesting, this research. And apart from that, do you have a kind of spiritual practice, first person practice that inform or shape your perspective?
Life is my spiritual practice. I'll put it that way. I don't follow any specific system. No. But I try to be attuned to life. So I engage with life in almost a religious way. Not because it's dogmatic. No, I don't do dogma. It's not my thing. But because I engage with life with a profound sense of mystery and with profound respect, which you could characterize as a kind of spiritual attitude towards life. But I don't have any specific practice. No, life is my practice.
Do you think that your perspective can be useful for the humankind and to have a more accurate approach to life with this view, or reaching happiness or peace of mind?
Well, I do think there may be something useful in what I have to say. Otherwise, I wouldn't be talking to you. I wouldn't have written books. So I do think that there might be something of use to others. But I don't have a hero complex. In other words, I don't think the world is going to go to hell if people don't read me. I don't regard myself as indispensable. I think I'm highly dispensable. The cemetery is full of indispensable people, and here we are still living. So no, nobody is indispensable. And I don't know what the ultimate value is of what I have to say. It may be a lot, maybe very little, maybe nothing. I don't know. But I don't make it my problem. My problem is, if I think I have something to say, I say it for what it's worth. And anything beyond that is not my responsibility. It's not up to me.
You have published a lot of books. You have a website where you give some teachings on analytic idealism. There's a course. It's free, and you participate in a lot of podcasts, and so you are very um occupied,
Active.
booked, and but how do you envision the future of your work? And do you have new projects?
I am the executive director of a relatively new foundation called the Essentia Foundation, and we promote idealism from a analytical and scientific perspective, not from the perspective of introspection.
Mm.
In other words, not from a spiritual or religious perspective. We don't have anything against spirituality or religion, much to the contrary, but we think there is a gap in our culture. We are missing rational, evidence-based arguments for idealism. In other words, one can very reasonably believe in idealism without needing any kind of spiritual
Mm.
insight. One can believe in idealism based purely on reason and evidence, non-anecdotal evidence, laboratory evidence. So that's the gap we are trying to fill. And that's the biggest project of my life. It's that foundation, because it makes what I do be about much more than my own ideas, much more than just me. It gives me an opportunity to work for all the other idealists that are out there, even those who don't know that they are or will be idealists, and idealists that are no longer around but have left a legacy behind that maybe isn't as well known as it should. So we will try to promote that as well. That's the biggest project. Now, in addition to that, I am writing 2 books right now, but that's a smaller thing. It's something that happens late in the evening. My main project is the foundation.
That's a lot of work, and I can say for my part that it's a very useful one. And I thank you for your work, and I want to express my gratitude for taking the time to have shared your profound insights and your perspective with us. And so we have reached the end of the interview. And again, really thank you for your precious time. And I will work on providing French subtitles for the interview as soon as possible. And I will put the video online. And thank you once again for your
Thank you. Thank you for
participation.
having me. Thank you for having me, Ludovic. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
It's been fun. Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.